Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's the No Name Cinema Society. That is us, and it is time for our classic movie discussion. And we've got an obscure one today. It's a film from 1967 called Will Penny, a little Western action. We don't talk about Westerns that often, but Will Penny's the movie for discussion for tonight. And hello, y'all. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts for the evening. And let me get straight to introducing you to some of my co-hosts for the evening. First, a young buck just starting his cowpoke career, Davey Joseph. How you doing, Drunk Davey?
That is a good way to describe me.
Yeah, I thought so. And of course, my other co-host is a half-insane, vindictive, villainous, rawhide preacher, Jay Money.
But a dancer.
But a dancer, right. I forgot about that for a second, even though I just watched this movie yesterday. Ladies and gentlemen, our schedule for the next set of episodes. This is the 42nd set of episodes. We did Mike Birbiglia's Indie Spotlight, Sleepwalk with Me, his indie film, his autobiographical film there. And tonight, of course, we're talking about our classic movie discussion, Will Penny, the Western from 1967. And coming up is our freeform segment, our sound off, and some crazy stuff is going to go down. We got a huge announcement, and we're going to recast some of the films that we talked about from 1966. And I'm going to do a very interesting top 5 based on the Indie Spotlight, and you'll find out about that. Which brings us to our trivia tidbit. And if you guys, do you guys remember the film Unforgiven?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Do you guys remember Will Money had 2 kids?
Yeah,
the beginning of the
I do remember that.
Yeah.
Do you guys know the names of Will Money's kids?
No.
Will Jr.
And?
Little Yancey happenstance.
No, and that was the trivia from that you might have seen on Facebook, and is that the kids from Unforgiven were named after this film, Will Jr. and Penny. So that's where they got the names for Will Money's kids and Unforgiven. So that's the trivia tidbit. It's summary time. You guys ready for summary?
Yes. But just me, not Davey Joe. Oh, there he is.
I am so ready.
You better get ready. Summary is clearly their favorite time of the show. And I actually, I sought out Nick Danger for helping me with this one because I had some wording issues. Will Penny is an aging, drifting cowhand who inadvertently gets involved in a dispute over a shot elk that leads to the death of a young man whose family swears revenge. The family pursues him across the country, but Will manages to seek refuge in a small cabin with a young woman and her son, who are squatting in the cabin until they are able to reconnect with the patriarch of their own family. This group creates a new family dynamic that just may give Will the second lease on life he never thought possible. So that's the summary we came up with, me and Nick Danger. How do you guys feel?
Yeah.
I like it.
Put it on a Hallmark card.
Really good.
Oh, thanks, Davey. That actually sounded sincere. Now, I normally have screening notes. Now, normally we have screening notes, and I talk about what people at the screening thought. I've actually never seen this before. This is not something I held as a screening. And a vote normally happens at a screening, but tonight the vote is going to happen live, and I'll explain that when the time comes. So, and these guys don't know what it's going up against, so this is really exciting. These two will actually determine a bracket themselves tonight. So to give opening thoughts, I'm going to let Jay Money go first.
I liked it enough, is what I would say. It's not the kind of movie that really stuck with me, but I think that there were some interesting qualities to it that made it worthwhile watching.
And Davey Joe, opening thoughts.
This is the movie they put on when the ball game gets rained out. You know, whatever.
Not Cleopatra?
No, it's not. It's not. If it was like 7 hours longer, it would be kind of like that.
So where does that fall on the Davey scale?
I mean, it's not brutal, but it's it's all right. I guess it's
close.
Inoffensive, maybe.
Unoffensive, and I would say that the movie is a slow, character-driven Western that I found mostly unfulfilling. So it almost sounds like Jay Money liked it the best. Is that fair to say, Jay Money?
You know, I'm trying to be fair to the movie. I think that, I guess I would say that it didn't. There wasn't a lot of lasting stuff for me. It almost felt generic in a way. But I guess I want to say that it might be just because of our modern viewing. I mean, I feel like it may have been more interesting to audiences at the time than it is now.
Let me just say this real quick. I saw it this morning and I don't remember it. very well.
Quote of the night already from Davy Joe. So yeah, I mean, like, let's start by talking about the screenplay, because that's where I want to nitpick. And looking at my notes, I'm finding I have mostly complaints, which I guess maybe I should focus on some positive things, but maybe we'll come to it. Ultimately, this movie is a love story, but like if you really think about like where it goes, it's this love story for Will and this woman, but it takes forever to get to this cabin where like a half of the movie takes place there. But if that's the case, like I feel like it needs to be the core of the movie, and it makes the first half of the movie kind of not moot, but there's too much of that if the main point of the movie is this cabin. It almost feels like as if the movie were meant to be episodic, like almost like a picaresque tale of this old traveler going from place to place, having different adventures and misadventures. I almost feel like it wasn't sure if it wanted to be that movie or this like snippet of that story about this like guy getting a second lease on life with this potential of the family. Am I on the right track at all, guys? Yeah,
I think it's a pretty fair assessment.
It felt like two different people wrote the movie. Like someone wrote the first half and then someone else wrote the second half. And that kind of falls into that same vein.
Now, do you mean in terms of like, because I feel like the character at least stayed consistent for better or worse.
Maybe the character. It didn't seem like there was one realistic line of dialogue for the first like 45 minutes, and then it just kind of snapped and it got a lot better in that regard. And you're right.
Whenever he said "sure thing," that sort of bumped for me. That felt a little anachronistic.
You're right. Then the story took a turn and it turned into the love story, and I just think that it just seems abrupt and odd how it kind of.
Yeah, because I mean, it did feel, and I like picaresque movies like that where you go for adventure, you know, like that's interesting to me, and I thought that's what we were heading for, but then we're just stuck in this cabin, and I liked some of the stuff that was going on there, but I mean, like. And it all of a sudden became a character piece, like a character-driven movie, which is fine. I normally love that stuff, but for a character piece, no one seemed really developed on the page. I feel like these characters were two-dimensional representations of ideas.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. I thought there were a few characters that had a lot of potential too, and they just.
Well, I mean, I think there's one performance that brings a lot to the table that I'll talk about later on. But I do think that like it's like he's the old lonely rider, as the song at the end suggests, you know, and he's got this gruff exterior, and something bad must have happened to him, and he's not that bright. It's just sort of like checking off some boxes instead of really building a character. I know you want to talk, Davey, but Jay Money was making a face, so I want to give him a chance to opine on this.
I guess what I would say is I half agree with you guys about everything you just said. I agree that the movie feels disjointed in a way, and I feel like there are kind of like two different movies going on. I totally see Davey Joe's point about that and about everything else you guys have said. But what I would argue is the thing that carries it through is this kind of, you know, existential thread that Will Penny is having. And I can see why they structured it the way they did. The first half is setting up, you know, sort of this sense of how he's given up on everything. The second half is sort of his redemption. He's the only character that has any kind of arc in this film. There's no other characters that have any kind of like thing going on.
And well, he has the potential for an arc. I'm not sure his arc ever really comes to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of questionable what actually happens with him, you know, just in general.
And I want to talk about that too. But I mean, I agree with you that was the intent. But as a screenplay, I do feel like the way that first half could have happened in the first third. And would have been more traditional screenplay structure. Yeah,
but I guess for me, it didn't bother me that it broke outside of that. And I think the reason that I'm giving Will Penny any more thought in general is because I feel like it did break outside of cliches of the genre. I mean, I think that for me, it didn't follow the normal guidelines of what I would expect from a Western, especially coming out of that time period.
So much so that I didn't even think to talk about it in the context of being a Western. You're right. It almost doesn't feel like it is.
The West is more of a setting.
You get the sense that the West is something that happened to him. You know what I mean? Like it's part of his character that weighs on him, the life of the West. One thing about the 60s Western, this is not in my notes at all. I'm totally off the cuff right now. But one thing about the 60s Western, or the evolution of the Western into the 60s, it's, you know, and this is even has hints of this in something as early as 1960 with The Magnificent Seven. Heck, even as early as The Searchers in 1956, the sense of the day of the cowboy fading, you know what I mean? Like the day of this lonely rider, that life is dying, but the stubbornness of leaving that life dooms these people. Like that concept is explored consistently throughout the 60s.
Definitely the Wild Bunch has that.
Absolutely. And like I feel like that is the umpteenth time that you've brought up the Wild Bunch. I mean, like it is, and it's coming up like in the next few months on the show, so I think we should hold off. This is you're gonna be super excited when that time comes. Anyway, so the other, keeping with this concept of character development, I had a real problem with the villains, actually. Like, I feel like they were really underdeveloped. I think it was interesting. Like, I was intrigued at first because that first encounter, and I talked about in the summary, the elk incident, they were kind of in the right.
Yes, that is so dumb. They're absolutely in the right. They shot the thing. It's stupid, and it's
holy cow.
Oh my God.
Joan just got real riled up.
It's just. I'm sorry. I'm totally. You made such a good point. It's these guys these are good characters. I thought they had a potential at any rate. They're not developed, and they don't turn out to be as good as they could be. But the fact that they're starting off this part of the story with them being clearly right, it's just completely stupid.
It was highly questionable, and again, I was intrigued by that at first, but then they shot first, which I was like, okay, so they're mean, they're right, but they're also a little mean, which was okay. But then their pursuit felt a little excessive and almost unnecessary to a point. Because I understand they were mad about their son getting killed. There was other guys there, they just chased Will. And furthermore, if they wanted to kill him, they had lots and lots of chances to kill him, and it really felt like, why are they keeping him alive? That felt so contrived. J Money.
Yeah, in general, that whole plotline, it set itself up to be like really the main impetus of the movie, with the opening kind of interaction there, and then it completely fell away in a way that I was like halfway through the movie, I'm like, what happened with that whole? What happened with that whole plot? Did that just completely go? Like there was no reference to it at all.
It's part of this thing where I think it was almost intended to be episodic. I feel like Will Penny could be a television show, and that goes with adventures, with this old guy, and yeah, I mean, it's these different movies. It's this idea that like he has different adventures, and then at the end they kind of come together maybe, and that's all well and good. I just blocked my own camera for a second, but. Yeah, like it was so disjointed in that regard. Davey, what are you gonna say?
So I thought that the bad guys, the three of them, they had this potential because
they had four of them. Remember the girl, the daughter?
Yeah. Well, I mean, how could you remember the girl? Like, what was the point of that? I don't know. Anyway, so
Davey's riled up. I love it.
First of all, the performance of the main guy was great. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the kind of the three bad guys in that. But
even though there were four.
Yeah, well, no, I mean theoretically there were four, but I mean the girl was just there. I mean maybe there was something in the original
it was so
script.
weird. She kept trying to seduce Will Penny, like it was like out of nowhere.
Wow, that was.
My issue, like, so this is a segue. Sorry, was there more, Davey?
I was just saying, I'm starting to realize this movie, maybe I disliked it more than I realized. Let's just.
I'm starting to feel the same way almost about myself, I'll be honest. So this leads to my other problem, which was the third act, the conclusion of the movie. It's like, I also don't understand how they found him in the cabin in the third act. And it was also very weird because there's this, I want to cut to J Money nodding real quick, but give me the nod, give me it good. But yeah, there's this there's this nice moment happening between Will and Kathryn, and then all of a sudden they enter and it's a profile shot. And it's almost like they're on laughing. They're like, huzzah, it's the third act time. It's like the way they come in, it's like totally contrived announcing of the third act. It was really, it struck me even while watching. I'm like, okay, I guess the third act is here. It was really funny. And in a probably inappropriate way. But J Money, you seem to agree that it was weird that they just showed up.
Yeah, I don't really understand it either. I mean, I think it goes back to the whole point you had earlier, which was that they had so many chances to take vengeance on his character, and they chose not to. And it was never really explained how they knew where he was, when they knew where he was, and also what ultimately their motivation was. Because, I mean, I don't feel like the performances were very good to begin with. I think they were all way too over the top and sort of milked for no reason. But they just never really had... They never really seemed, in a certain way, nefarious enough to warrant that much crazy.
It's funny because revenge is frequently seen as a noble concept. You know, like it's portrayed in a lot of movies as something, you know, we root for or desire for the characters that we follow. Not necessarily revenge against Will, because Will wasn't really involved in the initial dispute, although he might have pulled the trigger in defense of his friends. In this case, revenge is not looked upon as positive, and they're evil because they wanted revenge. And in that time period, I feel like revenge for the death of a loved one like that was, at least in other Westerns I've seen, is much more common. So it's interesting that they're vilified for something that, you know, that in Unforgiven, for example, is something that, you know, we admire. So I thought that was an interesting thing as well. The other thing that bothered me is Will's ending. And generally, you know, you see often, I talked about how this idea of re-exploring the cowboy and the life of the cowboy is sort of a lonely, you know, fading lifestyle that happens a lot in the 60s. And like this concept of deciding that you really can't do anything else, there's no other life for you, is a common one. But in Will's case, I feel like the movie takes great pains to prove otherwise. It almost seems really stupid that he doesn't stay, you know, and start a new life with Kathryn. And you know, and this leads to the only clip I could really find online, so I'm going to play it. And this is the final cabin scene between him and Kathryn, where he explains he can't stay, and his words seem hollow to me. Let's you guys watch and let me know what you think.
What happened?
Oh, Alex has got his back arched up some. Can't hardly blame him. He's sending you down below.
You coming with us? You want us to go down and wait while you work the wind up here?
I ain't staying here.
Will we go with you?
Kath. Shoot, you're still married.
Pardon?
You got a husband.
I've never been married, really. He'd never notice if we never showed up. Except for the work. You've been more of a father to Horace than Reuben ever was. That's not it, though, is it? Will. Will, what is it?
This come on so quick like.
Will, before I married Reuben, I had 2 whole years to think about it. And all of that time never helped a bit. And now I've got a few minutes and I'm sure. Will. I'm absolutely sure.
I'm damn near 50 years old.
Yes.
What could we do?
Well, there are lots of homesteads all over this land. Well, before, when we talked, what did you think that we'd do?
I don't know. I never really come face to face with it, I guess.
Will, do you love me?
What do I know about love? Love, I guess you could call it that. and more. I never felt like this about nobody. I want you, the button, for my own, but it takes a heap of time, years to build up a spread. I don't have them years no more. Homestead would just be starting up with a few measly cows. Come next January, I'd be in a storm trying to feed you and the button and the cattle.
Well, we don't have to ranch. We can farm.
Farm? I don't know nothing about farming.
I do.
Kath, I'm a cowhand. I've been a cowhand all my life.
Scared?
Damn right. Bad scared. I told you before. I lived one way my whole life. What would I do? Try to feed you and the boy on some measly 6-cow ranch. What did I do?
Love us?
Hell, you don't know how bad it can be, ranching. Say I got a frostbit foot or broke my hand. There we are starving. How's love gonna stand up to that?
It's supposed to, isn't it?
Yeah, I come closer with you than I ever will with anybody. I've seen what it was meant to be like. But it's too late, Kath. Too late for me.
So, guys, that's the clip I was talking about. How do you feel about this ending? I understand it was a common thing, but it didn't. It actually, in this particular, and it feels right in other movies like The Wild Bunch, for example. But in this movie, it feels wrong and inappropriate and unearned.
The whole ending of this movie is horrendous. You're right. It makes no sense. He falls in love with this woman and then he just walks away, even though he's clearly old and can barely do the job anymore that he needs to go do. And also, like, the boss and his guys show up and he's supposed to be in some sort of trouble, but he's not. He's not. The guy's so angry, he's going to give these guys a job and he wants the guy to stay on the job. And it's just, the whole ending of this movie is incomprehensible. Makes no sense. And
So you agree it made more sense for him to stay?
Oh, it absolutely made sense to stay. It's inexplicable.
Shame money.
Yeah,
I just want to say, if anybody is doing the drinking game for No Name Cinema Society, you guys are clearly drunk right now with what's going on in Davey's world. You guys are clearly wasted if you were playing the drinking game tonight. Shame money.
I don't know what the answer is on this one, because I honestly wouldn't have wanted him to have accepted the relationship at the end either and gone up into the sunset with Kathryn. To me, that was a very unbelievable romance, and it didn't feel right to me to begin with.
I feel like it had potential. Like, I feel like the romance, and I guess I was going to get to this shortly, but I feel like the romance was underexplored because they spent all that time in the first half of the movie, and I feel like a few more scenes, I could have gotten there. I still felt that the way that Will was portrayed and the situation was portrayed, that it didn't make sense for him to go off at his age especially and do something else. Like, this was a golden opportunity for a guy who's searching for another chance or another thing to live, another way to live his life, and he just turns his back on.
Okay, I guess I would split with you on that one a little bit. I do think it's right for the way that Will is portrayed in this movie. I mean, he's basically a depressed guy. I mean, he's dealing with this sort of overall issue with his own self-worth and also how his life turned out and all the regrets he feels about being a Western cowboy, basically, and not really having amounted much. I could see that impetus being too much to try to change paths. I can see why they chose to have him walk, down the same path that he was going on, because I think that is his ultimate goal towards self-destruction. To me, it made more sense than making it into a nice off into the sunset tied up romance. It just didn't.
Well, I mean, I would argue that they didn't. I did not feel that they developed that sense of the character. I feel like that is a character that that I've seen in other movies, that other movies have done a better job of making that character, making me feel that about the character. But between the performance and the way the character is written and underexplored, I feel like they didn't get there. They didn't earn that ending the way that I saw the movie. But I obviously we're split on that. And it sounds like Dave's with me.
Oh yeah, the ending sucks.
I don't think Dave.
But I mean, the other thing that I thought a lot about while watching this movie is editing choices that were curious. They're clearly very deliberate. Number one is the pace. Iconic pace in this movie. It's a choice. Dissolves don't help with that. And I feel like this movie like really used dissolves. I think in between every scene there was dissolves, and it really kept things very slow. But you know, it was sometimes I love a slow burn sometimes, but this movie lacked energy. And I feel like it was a real problem. J Money, you agreed?
Well, the place where it really stuck out to me as being oddly put in there, and I don't know how intentional it was, and if it just felt flat, or if it was just bad editing, was the scene where they're trying to rescue their friend, and from getting him from the wagon to the doctor in town. They stretched out that entire sequence so much in a way that didn't quite make sense with the urgency of what they were also talking about.
Especially now that you watch the whole movie, those extra moments with that threesome does not pay off as much as it should have.
Right, exactly. It really didn't feel like it was feeding anything that was going to play through later on. At the time, I'm like, I thought almost it was a funny choice, but by the end of the movie, I'm like, I don't understand what the thinking was behind the way that they handled that in general.
The other thing about the editing is there was a bunch of line crosses, and I talk about the line now and then in the show, but it doesn't. It's very rare to see such a sloppy thing like a crossing the 360-degree line. But it happened a few times in this movie, especially in the cabin. So it almost feels like overall, like the pace is deliberate, but there's a lot of sloppy editing.
Yeah, it's funny. I felt like the cabin itself, the space of the cabin, and this might have to do with the editing as well, it seemed to change a lot. They really sort of changed the way that the cabin felt as in terms of an environment for the three characters.
I think that's supposed to sort of typifies the arc of their relationship. But I think that was intentional in a positive way.
I can see your point. I found it incredibly disorienting.
It might be that those were jump cuts that you found jarring, really, and without realizing it, what it was. Davey, anything on editing?
I mean, you addressed the dissolves. That's really the thing that annoyed me.
It's rare to see them now. I want to talk about performances, but before we do, because J Money brought it up a little bit, the look of the cabin. I actually like the one thing I will say I liked about the movie is the cinematography. The interiors in particular, I thought, and the cabin were kind of rich. I understand the art direction changed, but I thought the lighting felt natural and rich and textured. And also the exteriors, a lot of Westerns would give you a lot of vistas. This movie doesn't. Like, I feel like it's a grittier kind of West. The exteriors weren't too flashy. There were some mountains and background stuff in there, but they weren't the focus of the shot. And I kind of appreciated that. Like, I felt like it was a different kind of Western in that way. Like, it wasn't like a John Ford painted desert kind of Western. J Money, you're a cinematography expert. What do you think?
Oh, wow. The most passive-aggressive jab at me you've ever taken, perhaps.
Actually, no, I actually meant that. I mean, what I should have said is you are, like sort of like a design and visual expert. I probably should have said that. But I mean, like, I do think that your thoughts on cinematography are valid. And more valid.
All right. That's very nice.
More valid than Davies is really what I was getting at. Wow. So what do you have to say about it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that they chose a lot of really practical seeming environments. I mean, I think that speaks a lot to some of the realism that I think in this movie, that was interesting to me because it wasn't about grand vistas like you're saying. It necessarily wasn't about the romance of the West. It was certainly more about a practical working version of the West. They had a couple scenes that were kind of like expansive outside shots, but most of the time it was really more about what was immediately around the actors and what they were up against in terms of the odds of the environment as opposed to being a beautiful thing to look at.
That's what I saw in it. Davey, what do you got?
Just kind of echoing what you're saying. Some of the framing was really good in the sense that they did get a lot of the great country shots in there, but they were never just about that. They were always seemed like they were part of the story, had a person in there and part of the dialogue. I noticed it while there was some really horrendous dialogue that the shot was framed very nicely.
Just as we were saying something nice, he's got to get another thing in there about the movie.
That's the half of the movie where the dialogue is just inane. So
now let's open this can of worms about performances, and I think I'm mostly with J Money on this, except that no, I mean actually maybe not. Except Charlton Heston is a problem for me, and I very rarely like Charlton Heston. And we did a 1966 film with Charlton Heston called cartoon. We didn't do it on a show, but that was one of our 1966 films. It was my number 3 film from 1966 that we talked about in a sound off. And he's pretty good in that movie. That's one of his better performances. And Charlton Heston is good when he has to be big. When he has to be a little small, my issue with Charlton Heston is like you always notice that he's acting. You know what I mean? Like he never really feels immersed in a character. Like there's melodrama in every word he utters. You can sense that he's trying to be a more inner character, and like it doesn't feel real. Like he's a real problem. I feel like it's Charlton Heston trying too hard to be smaller. I have an issue with Charlton Heston in this movie, and he's the lead. He's Will Penny, so it's a problem.
It's funny because you said something that I agree with generally about him being kind of real big. The last movie I saw with him was the one where he's Michelangelo.
Agony and the Ecstasy.
Yes, yeah, and he was really over the top in that, and it was kind of neat in a caricaturish kind of way. I actually thought he was kind of.
I like him as Moses. I mean, I like he's terrible in most movies, and he won an Oscar for Ben-Hur, and I don't like him in Ben-Hur, but I like him as Moses in the Ten Commandments because Moses is so big and grand and like,
yeah.
Free my people, like that's perfect for him.
I thought he was all right. I thought he was pretty good this time around.
J Money.
Well, it's almost like he went to this movie by default to me because I don't feel like anyone else really had much to work with. I mean, I see your point. I see that he seems like he's trying a little bit too hard to fit within the role that they're talking about. You know, I'm not like a huge Heston fan either. I think I like him probably a little more than you do, but I wouldn't call him a great actor necessarily. He's what we had in this movie. Like it was about him. It was about his character.
I understand. So. I mean, I think in somebody else's hands, like I feel like even Clint Eastwood's performance in Unforgiven, like Will Penny, like I think that's on purpose as well. I think there's a connection there. Clint Eastwood's not that great. He's a great director. He's not that great of an actor either, you know, like especially for something as subtle as that, you know, like he struggled in moments in Unforgiven, although it's a much better movie.
You know, it's interesting because we keep talking about Unforgiven, the connections between this, but the movie that I kept thinking about, well, there are actually 2 different movies I thought about when I was watching this. We'll talk about the other one later, but the first one I kept thinking about was Dirty Harry. And a lot of it was...
Wow, okay.
Well, only in the sense that we're talking about these 2 sort of dinosaurs of a certain dynasty. Like we're talking about these 2 men who sort of see how they're at the end of the rope with the kind of, character they've created. Like, you know, Dirty Harry is a cop and he kind of sees how he doesn't fit the new generation of things. I feel like Charlton Heston's also going through the same motions of that in this sense. Like he's seeing how his way of life is sort of dying out, and he's also seeing how he doesn't really fit into the system anymore in the same way either. So they both had that sort of like wariness to them that I don't know. I felt like there was a lot of crossover there. I guess I felt like I understand why the character was doing it.
See that. I can see that to some degree. I mean, Will Penny's a lot older than Dirty Harry. Dirty Harry movie we talked about in episode 15.3. But I can see that a little bit, but it didn't. I think the comparisons are minute, to say the least. But it's interesting that Clint Eastwood keeps coming up in this regard because this feels like 90s Clint Eastwood movie almost to some degree. I do want to talk about some of the other performances, but then we got to get on to do the brackets because Donald Pleasance also was in a couple of our 1966 films. He's extremely over the top in both Fantastic Voyage and Roman Polanski's Cul-de-sac, both from 1966, and both the movies that at least I watched for that year in review. And he was way too over the top in both those movies. He's over the top in this movie too, but it almost feels like just the right kind of over the top. It's a poorly written character, but he's all balls and gusto. It sounds like Davey liked him.
Yeah, no, I did like him. I liked him a lot.
J Money, it sounds like you didn't.
No, I found his performance kind of grating.
I can see it going over the way. Like it's a borderline thing because he's definitely over the top, but sometimes there's these over the top performances that just sort of like Jack Nicholson and Batman. I'm not saying it's that quality of performance. I'm just saying like he took a lot of risks and was mostly interesting to me. But I can certainly see it being grating, especially after having seen how grating is in the Fantastic Voyage. Actually, it's just Fantastic Voyage, not the Cul-de-sac. Like he's super annoying in those movies, Donald Pleasance. But here it seemed to match or seemed to fit, the little that was on the page. Because the screenplay, again, I feel like is the main offender here. But then I wanted to talk to you guys about, I did have one performance that I found surprising and beautifully nuanced. Someone I'd never really even heard of, Joan Hackett as Kathryn, I thought it's a terribly written role. This is a great example of a poorly written role that's brought to life by a good actress. That was the impression I had from Joan Hackett. It sounds like J Money didn't like her very much.
It's hard for me to make the difference between like what she did with the role and what the role was that was already provided for her, because I just don't feel like there was enough character or there was enough meat to the character to begin with for her to have the sort of reactions that she did.
I agree that there wasn't meat, but I mean, like, I feel like there was moments where she was really adding stuff. And I think about, there's this scene, they have a quiet scene together. It's the best scene in the movie, I think. I wish I had a clip of that instead of the one I showed. But where there's just the two of them sitting at the table, and there's a lot of subtext, maybe too much subtext, quite frankly. It's almost like unnatural how much subtext is in the scene. They're sort of feeling each other out, and I feel like she's really trying to add dimension to this woman who's sort of like a stereotype of the Old West, and she's trying to bring more to her in her body language, in her delivery, in what she's doing with her eyes. That's what I interpret from this performance. David, where you land on Joan Hackett?
She was good. It's not a great part. She did what she could with it, is basically what I'd say. I don't know how you do much better. The scene that kind of sticks out to me is when he comes up to the cabin and she's got the shotgun on him, and I felt like she played that pretty well, because it's a tough line to play there, because
you're trying to be tough and stand your ground.
Want to be scared too, so I think she pulled it off.
J Money, rebuttal.
I would have thought that Davy Joe would pick the butter churning scene. It speaks to his heart.
The singing Christmas Carol scene, that was awesome. I love it.
Oh, geez, now they're getting sarcastic. I will say that Joan Hackett, even though I'd not heard of her before this role, is an Oscar-nominated actress. She was nominated for Best Supporting Actress in 1981 for a movie called Only When I Laugh, a movie that won her a Golden Globe for in that same category, Best Supporting Actress. That's one trivia tidbit. One more trivia tidbit I have to drop on you guys before we get to the brackets is the movie director. I don't have much to say about the direction, but Tom Grease is his name. And one other thing he directed was a movie in 1970, also starring Charlton Heston, called The Hawaiians, which, if you remember, and I know J Money doesn't remember doing the 1966 show, but The Hawaiians came up in the 1966 show because it is a sequel to Hawaii, my number 2 movie of 1966. So Tom Grease here directed the sequel to Hawaii 3 years after this. So I thought that was a fun little tidbit that I needed to sneak in there for you guys.
Why didn't anyone think that movie needed a sequel? It was like 3 movies long to begin with.
First of all, you haven't seen Hawaii, and Hawaii was the biggest selling film of 1966. It was the biggest.
People used to have a lot more patience. Or they do have a lot more time, I guess. I mean, it's one or the other.
Well, I mean, don't forget, during the 50s and 60s, movies were starting to compete with television more. So that movies had a lot of responses to try and compete with television. But one was, let's make movies longer, bigger, events. And so most of the epics that we think about, whether it be, we talked about, and a lot of them starred Charlton Heston, quite frankly, but, Ben-Hur, El Cid, all those have Charlton Heston in them. Exodus does not have Charlton Heston, but it's another long one. The Sand Pebbles, like big event movies, Dr. Zhivago, Lawrence of Arabia, like those were the movies that like people were flocking to see because that got them out of the house. Movies you needed to see it in the theater. You got me on a tangent, but you got me on like a film history kick. So I just wanted to give you drop some knowledge on you. David, do you feel educated?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, because we ran out of time, I'm not going to ask you guys about the themes of Will Penny, but it sounds like J Money thinks there's something existential.
I always hate the themes anyway.
Thank God.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, I didn't have any themes. I didn't actually have any myself. That's how I felt about Will Penny. Which brings us to the classic movie showdown. The bracket is back. This is where we pit 2 movies against each other. And Davy Joe, these rules might be bent a little bit for this episode, but do you want to read us the bracket rules?
You're messing with the formula here. Well, I mean, the way it's supposed to work, you show these movies at screenings that you host. Movies have to be 15 years or older. People vote, and they have to have seen it in your presence, and they have to have seen it within the last year. And then the winner moves on. You don't vote unless it's a tie, and then you can vote.
Anyway, those are the rules. And tonight, all the rules apply somewhat, and we'll talk about that. We're in the Westerns bracket, and Will Penny is a 9 seed. And it sounds like J Money's already guessed what it's going up against.
Did I?
It sounded like from a comment you made earlier that you had a theory about what it is.
No. That comment was something tangential. We might get to at some point.
Okay, so a 9 seed, Davy Joe, would go up against in a first round matchup.
8.
An 8 seed. So the 8 seed in the Western bracket in this quadrant would be.
I can take a guess.
Go ahead, take the guess.
Is it Missouri Breaks?
No, Missouri Breaks was a 16 seed that defeated Unforgiven in the first round, if you remember. Instead,
that's ridiculous.
He's still upset about that. Will Penny goes up against number 8 seed, which was one of our 1966 movies, which Davey and I did watch together. So Davey did watch it in my presence.
Oh, yeah.
J Money did watch it for the show, but did not technically watch it in my presence. So whether or not J Money's vote will count is what we have to talk about over the course of the, we'll have a vote on whether J Money's vote will count.
Excellent.
But honestly, it may not need to at this point. But I mean, because J Money's vote may not count, because technically he did not see it in my presence, but I know that he saw it for the show. J Money, The Professionals versus Will Penny.
Yeah, Professionals are the way. Professionals is a pretty enjoyable movie.
Right.
It
So
just wins hands down.
it only becomes a question of if your vote counts if Davey's going to disagree with you, and it doesn't sound like he will. Davey, The Professionals versus Will Penny.
Oh, I mean, The Professionals is a good movie, and this is not. So, yeah.
Can't get any more simpler than that, quite frankly. So, can you tell me what about The Professionals makes it a good movie?
No, not anymore.
Do you remember watching it together? Do you remember we had 282 burger and cuddled and watched it?
I'll tell you, that burger was good.
Maybe they should be our sponsor instead of
Yeah, I mean, I could probably choke down a Bex if I had one of those burgers.
We were talking about The Professionals, and we can get back on track.
I remember it being kind of exciting. I'm sure I'd have been a lot more eloquent around the time I saw it.
Was it December?
It must have been. It was
January, probably
It
December.
was the winter, and it was before the year-end show. So
Well, obviously it had to be before you. I just don't remember how long you were in New York, but yeah. So and we had a nice time. We had a nice chat.
we did. It's a good time.
I've been in the same room as Davey like twice in the last 10 years.
Yeah, wow. It doesn't happen much, does it?
Yeah. No, it's a rarity.
You don't stay put.
Sure, as if you do.
I know.
J Money is the only one of us to have done all his shows in the same place.
I never go anywhere.
Yeah, well, and that's probably for the best as well.
Yeah.
So that Professionals moves on in the Western bracket, and maybe it goes up against the Missouri Breaks because it would have if it's in the same quadrant. I just don't remember if it is.
Oh yeah, Professionals.
Well, I'm not sure. I could look and see if they do.
Whatever. Well,
You would think I would have done this work in advance, but I've here got the official folder of brackets, so I can take a look and see if they do meet.
They
do. Meet. The Professionals meets the Missouri Breaks in the next round. So at what point did you watch the Missouri Breaks? Because we did the show in March of 2016, so you would have seen the two of them within a year of each other. Davey Joe, is the Missouri Breaks going to finally get knocked out of this bracket?
I mean, it shouldn't be the Professionals. I mean, the people that you have vote on these things, man, they make a lot of bad decisions. So I don't know. I mean,
So this is your decision. I'm telling you right now. Second round matchup. The Professionals versus the Missouri Breaks.
Winner, Professionals.
The Professionals moves on to the Sweet 16. Richard Lester's 1966 film, The Professionals.
Awesome. All right.
This is very exciting. Missouri Breaks, a shocking winner, defeating Unforgiven, is eliminated at last. Although, let's just call a spade, the Missouri Breaks is our most successful show ever.
I mean, I don't think Missouri Breaks should have been knocked out by Unforgiven, but I would have given Missouri Breaks over the Professionals.
Oh, wow. I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, controversial statement, I know.
Good thing his vote doesn't count. Do you want to say why?
I just think it was a more interesting film overall. I really like Professionals. I think it's a really good, straightforward sort of action Western movie with a great ensemble cast and a very cohesive storyline. But Missouri Breaks is really weird, man. It's really enjoyably
it's
weird.
Fascinating. It is totally fascinating. Maybe that's why it's our most successful show. I feel bad that it's knocked out because it's our most successful show. Now it's not going to get talked about anymore.
You know what? This is a total non sequitur, but there's just one last thing that I really hated about Will Penny, and I wanted to get it in there.
Sneak it in.
I thought the score sucked. It was grating and annoying.
I actually have that. That's one of the things. It's funny. That's one of the things I skipped over. I wrote sappy and saccharine.
Whew.
And
Wow.
an excess use of bongos.
Just terrible.
I'm glad I don't have any roommates tonight because I feel like I'm being really loud in Astoria. But all right, guys, let's close it out. It's about time, and I'm gonna have to I have to work in the morning. Unfortunately, my set life. Our next classic is an iconic 60s musical that gets a 70s movie treatment, and that's you know how Davey likes musicals. We got another one coming up on the next classic. Next up, though, in just about 4 days, is our Sound Off, where we're going to have a super big announcement. We're going to recast some of the 1966 films that we watched. The Professionals is not among them, but we're going to give you some modern actors that could play some of these roles if those films were remade today. And I'm going to give my top 5 films directed by stand-up comedians, a very obscure category for me to do a top 5, but hey, that's part of the fun. Anyway, so that's all coming up at the Sound Off. In the meantime, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.